In South Africa, at least 14,000 people gathered inside a Johannesburg cricket stadium Tuesday to hear former U.S. President Barack Obama deliver a speech on the eve of the 100th anniversary of the birth of anti-apartheid icon Nelson Mandela. Obama told the crowd strongman politics are ascendant suddenly, whereby elections and some pretense of democracy are maintained, the form of it. But those in power seek to undermine every institution or norm that gives democracy meaning. Obama was speaking during the 16th annual Nelson Mandela lecture. The speech is Obama's highest profile event since leaving the White House in 2017 after 8 years in office. Obama briefly met Mandela in 2005, 3 years before he was elected as the first black U.S. president. He delivered a moving eulogy at Mandela's memorial service in 2013. While Obama's speech also focused on bridging divides and resisting oppression and inequality. For more perspective on the significance of that speech, as well as Obama's relationship with Africa, I'm joined in studio by Grant Harris, CEO of Harris Africa Partners. He was previously President Obama's senior advisor on African affairs in the White House. Mr. Harris, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
So first, let's talk about the speech. Break down a little bit, what you got out of this speech, how significant it was, and what it really means for the continent.
I think the speech was very significant, and it was significant for the continent, but this speech really had global implications. And this was a speech about what it means to be a citizen, what it means to be confronting some of the strongman politics, as you said, that we are seeing really sweep across many countries. And it poses a question that we all need to answer individually. How are we going to confront these trends? How are we going to stand up for the ideals and the values that we hold dear?
Mm-hmm. And we know that President Obama, over the time that he was president, there were expectations just about throughout the continent of what he will do for the continent of Africa. What would you say, in few words, was his legacy, or is his legacy as far as Africa is concerned?
I think President Obama has a strong legacy in a couple of regards. He really focused on youth and supporting young African leaders, which I think is a critical challenge right now. Can African leaders, with the help of international partners, create the jobs and the opportunities for this young population to really thrive and bring back what is needed to their community? And the second issue is he focused on power and broader trade and investment issues, trying to move the focus of policy away from aid and much more towards two-way trade, much more towards increased U.S. investment and the like, with power being a key focus on that, convening and leveraging over $50 billion in public-private partnerships to try to electrify the continent.
Mm-hmm. And, today, or the events of this week, also maybe focusing so much on Nelson Mandela, but people are still thinking about what President Obama himself said during his presidency, that he wanted to create a strong partnership between the continent of Africa and the United States, rather than having this dependency kind of culture where African countries just depend on Western nations. Did he achieve this?
I think that he made real progress. His speech in Ghana in 2009 really hearkened on those themes about mutual respect, mutual responsibility. And the emphasis of his policies and of his engagement was to really try to deepen the relationships, which were long-standing, but also needed more in terms of trade and investment, supporting economic growth, really helping advance these markets, which are obviously quite diverse across the continent and in different stages in terms of attracting capital. I think that in leaving office, he really left an impression, as I mentioned, in putting these issues on the table about youth and power and the challenges of the day, and I think that he made great strides. Is any administration perfect? Absolutely not. In hindsight, there are other things I would have loved to have done as well. But I think it's a proud legacy in terms of engaging the continent, notwithstanding that the expectations when he took office were exceedingly high. I think unrealistic.
And perhaps that was the undoing. When you look at, for example, in South Africa, there were actually protests against Obama right now. As he went down there, there are some people who thought he shouldn't be the person to give this lecture. What do you think he didn't get right as far as Africa is concerned, such that there are some Africans who still kind of don't feel like they're satisfied with what he did as president and even how he has related with the continent and its people?
It's a great question, and I think we need to unpack two different issues. First is who should deliver a lecture such as this in bringing to bear the legacy and the principles of Nelson Mandela. That's a tall order. And some people may disagree with choices, but I've found that each year, no matter who the choice is, there's some people who disagree and think it should be someone else. Personally, particularly after having heard the speech, I can think of no one better to really have delivered this lecture and to put these issues on the table. I think that's different than what President Obama's legacy is with respect to Africa. This, as I mentioned, is not a speech about U.S.-Africa relations. It's not a speech about U.S.-South Africa relations. And of course, Nelson Mandela is meaningful not only in a South African context and an African context, but as a global icon. And now is precisely the time when we should all be asking ourselves, are we living up to the ideals that he sought to live by? And are we doing what we can and should do as citizens in our own countries to really better our world?
Thank you. And we'll definitely continue that conversation tomorrow too. I appreciate very much, Grant, for you coming in and sharing your perspectives with us.
Thank you for having me.